Today we have a very special guest at the EWTN studios here in Walsingham. We have the new rector of the shrine in Walsingham, Mgr Philip Moger. Mgr Philip, welcome to EWTN studios.
Thank you.
Can I ask how you're feeling at this early point of your time here at Walsingham?
The people are very friendly, very welcoming. People have been very kind and generous. I feel as I've been here longer, in a good sense, not in a burdensome sense. It's a strange time, obviously, in many ways, but...
You're a priest of the Leeds Diocese and you've ended up here in East Anglia, in Norfolk, at England's principal Marian Shrine. How does the process work by a new rector is appointed by the bishops?
Well, that's probably a $64 million question. I was asked by my bishop, followed very quickly by Bishop Alan Hopes, the Bishop of East Anglia. But for a job like this, somebody somewhere suggests a name or two or three, and it's a decision of the Bishops' Conference, and then it's relayed down the line, so to speak, to me. Now, how my name came to be on the list, I've no idea, and perhaps that's as well.
Yes, indeed. I've had the pleasure of meeting you before in your diocese, in fact at the cathedral in Leeds, where you were administrator before you came here. I'd have to say that Leeds, which is a northern city in Yorkshire, couldn't be more contrasting with the pastures of East Anglia that you've arrived in. Are you feeling a slight sort of culture shock?
Oh, very much so. In fact, I had I'd moved from the cathedral a year ago to a large suburban parish in the northeast of Leeds, where we had trees and gardens in the grounds. It was a big site, but even that doesn't prepare you for village life. Everything is at a different pace, and one of the things I was thinking of when various lockdowns have been introduced, and for example pubs closing at 10 o'clock, and I thought, well, in Walsingham life seems to get quiet before then anyway. It's a different pace,
yes,
and actually very attractive, but it does take some getting used to, yes, because you're used to street lights, you're used to traffic, you're used to shops of every kind nearby or within a mile or so, buses and trains, and it's completely different.
Yeah, it's almost a cliche, but there's definitely, as you say, a different pace of life here, which, you mentioned the pubs having to close at 10 o'clock. In Walsingham, they'd have to extend their opening hours probably to meet that requirement. But
Exactly.
But there's another aspect of, this is village life. Mm-hmm. But this is a very special village. It's a very unusual village. It's got this wonderful history, this wonderful spiritual centre, and it has, as the priest in charge of the shrine, you have this constant procession of Catholics from across England and indeed further, who come here on pilgrimage. So it is quiet, and it's certainly quiet outside the pilgrim season, but at the height of the pilgrim season, this place is just completely overrun with people and with activities, and is like running a major event centre. So is this the calm before the storm, do you think?
It could be. I think it's difficult to predict, because obviously when I was asked to come, it was one thing. By the time I arrived, of course, COVID was, well, if I say full swing, that's probably not quite true, because it waxes and wanes, doesn't it? So whereas coming at the beginning of, or mid-September when I arrived, in normal times, I'm guessing that there would still be some large-ish pilgrimages to come, so people arriving on coaches as well as coming privately, including my own diocese as it happens. That hasn't happened. But what has happened is some of the groups, again my own diocese, have had a virtual pilgrimage. So the bishop came and his secretary and another priest and celebrated the Mass, which people could watch live stream, and many people did.
Yes. Now, we are speaking sort of at the beginning of the late autumn, early winter, when the pilgrimage season would have been dying down anyway. And I always get the sense that in Walsingham it's a time for regrouping and replenishing, and people take time out and various other things. And I guess in your case, Monsignor Philip, it is a moment when you can start to look around a shrine. And one of the things which has struck me, and I wonder if this is correct, is that whatever the administrative burden in like a cathedral in Leeds, I would say the administrative burden here seems greater because you're dealing with this great sort of apparatus around pilgrims, pilgrimages, negotiating with civil authorities and so on and so forth. Is that inaccurate?
Yes, it is. But at the same time, we're very fortunate here to have some very good staff, and there are some senior posts. For example, the Director of Operations, who only arrived in September at the beginning, 2 weeks before me. That is a new post, responsible to the Chief Executive. But you're right, this time of year, things do wind down, even in good times.
Yes.
And I think the idea was that the Rector's summer holidays took place in January.
That's correct.
Because that was the time when you knew you could be off, because it was really quiet. So, but we have a good staff, and as you say, it's a time to regroup. It's a time to look around. It's a time to refurbish. I think Elmham House, our accommodation block, that's a time when they're able to do some decorating and refurb.
Yes. Because
there's nobody in, or very few people in.
You're following on from Monsignor John Armitage, who finished his time here, and it was a time which was culminating in the rededication of England as Mary's Dowry, which took place in the strangest of times, except that you probably know that the original dedication took place in equally turbulent times on the back of the Black Plague. Yeah. Are you very conscious of that sort of spiritual aspect of your new post, that you're coming at a time of really quite a historic moment for Walsingham and for England?
Yes, and also, I mean, you mentioned the original dedication, but if we go back to the appearance of Our Lady to Richeldes, again, 11th century Norman conquest and all that followed from that, it was a turbulent time. And there have been many of these times in the past, apart from you mentioned the plague, then there's of course the 2 world wars in the last century. And I think that maybe it's a time when people have the opportunity, at least, to be more aware that there is more to life than commerce or possessions, what we can acquire for ourselves, and an opportunity to reflect more on the greatness of what God offers us, rather than, as I say, what we can acquire for ourselves. And it is a difficult time. And what we don't know, of course, is how it's going to work out.
That's right.
And when it's going to finish. Is it going to finish quickly? Or is this going to be, hopefully not, something recurring for more than a few months? So it's difficult to plan anything very specific, because you don't quite know what you're going to be dealing with and when you're going to be dealing with it. But we are here, and we will remain here. That's the main thing.
Do you see a sort of providential aspect to this, in that it's, that how you're describing it there, that we do sort of plan our lives, and we base our lives on certainties, which 9 times out of 10 actually happen or come about. And for the first time in my life, maybe yours as well, everything seems very uncertain. We can't plan for anything. I mean, we're joking a little bit about your, potential holiday slot in January. Well, who knows what the situation will be.
Yeah.
But how can that be a moment of evangelization in general, but also for a place like Walsingham? How can it be a I don't know, a sort of a place of refuge for people spiritually?
Well, I think, going back to what I said about the circumstances in which the shrine started, and the first dedication, and then now, you also have to remember that from the time of the Reformation, there was nothing here. The abbey, it's called the Abbey Estate, but the Priory, Walsingham Priory, next to the Holy House, was all destroyed.
Yeah.
And now you can see the arch from the east end of the Priory Church, and you can there's a stone marking the spot where the Holy House was. So for a few centuries there was nothing except the memory. But if we look back into the Hebrew Scriptures, you have the whole exile of the Jewish people. The temple was destroyed. People were taken off into exile. Some people were left, and eventually people came back. But it took years, and for many of them, it's difficult to imagine how they could see that there was any future at all. This was a complete abandonment. And yet, it not only wasn't that, but scripture scholars reckon that there was a deepening of the faith and understanding of who and what God was as a result of that. Now, that wasn't seen at the time. It wasn't seen when it was happening. It's only reflecting on it afterwards and meditating and through prayer and scholarship to realise, well, actually, yes, if you look back, it was at this point that the faith deepened in this respect or that respect. So I think it's difficult for us to know exactly what the graces and fruits may be from this time. But there is no situation, however unpromising, out of which God cannot bring something new. That's the hope, and that's happened before.
I mean, I think that's a very interesting way to approach this. You probably know that when the rededication took place earlier this year, it was live streamed. And you probably know that the systems crashed. The media systems crashed simply because there was so many people wanting to be part of that rededication. I think it was 500,000 or some such, which is probably the biggest, we could probably safely say is the biggest pilgrimage ever to Walsingham at one of the most important moments. Because if you take what you're saying about the destruction of the temple and the exile in Babylon, and Jeremiah and Ezekiel write about the sort of inner turning, the kind of the way in which the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, will speak directly to people. And I just wonder if there's something whereby, however vaguely, through the live streaming, through the way in which the world is being reached through media, if there's an aspect where the Holy Spirit's using that in a moment when people have nothing else, I mean, you will have found, I'm sure, that the live streaming of masses from the shrine during the pandemic has been, the numbers have been incredible, and in some ways it has established that as a kind of place, a part of people's religious practice. And I'm just wondering, is that something you would see as a continuum, or do you see that as merely an emergency provision?
Yes, that's an interesting question. So certainly you have to be very more aware when you're live streaming, celebrating Mass, for example, than when you're not. Not that you take less care when you're not, but it's this sort of added ingredient. But I do recognise that that it has been a great help to many people, and some of those people will not be able to get to Mass anyway. So when things get back to whatever normal means, when they get back to normal, we'd have to think very carefully before we suddenly said, well, everybody can come now, so we'll just stop live stream, because there will be people who, either because they're not able to leave their home or because they live too far away, who will still want spiritually to be associated with Our Lady's shrine. And if this is the way that God has got us to sort of do it, well, that's it. Because so many times we make plans and God has other ideas. I'll give you an example. When I first went to the cathedral in 2008, my second time, which, by the way, I was there as a curate once, and I came back as dean, I was aware of a lot of young people, by young, I mean late teenagers, university students, postgrads, working. And I looked round and I thought, well, I'm sure they all have family and friends, but how many of those friends are Catholic? So we set up a sort of a group, if anybody wants to come. We got about maybe 18, 19 people. And that developed, and they were obviously capable of running a lot of it themselves. But what happened was, in a period of about 10 years, we had about 10 or 11 marriages in the group.
Yeah.
And one wag who worked at the cathedral said, "Oh, it's Moger's marriage bureau." Well, of course, I hadn't the first idea. Believe it or not, it had. Although priests do have a reputation for matchmaking for people sometimes, well, that's fair enough. But that was not in my mind, but it was in God's mind. Mm. And so we reach out, we put out into the deep, if you like, in faith, thinking one thing, and God allows us to think that, and then shifts it.
So, if that is the case, and I think you're right, what do you think is, how does Monsignor Philip then perceive, because you're setting out into the deep, are you setting out in the deep with a vague idea of what you think might happen, or are you simply, it's blind faith and saying, Lord, whatever?
Well, I think it's the latter, because I think if you, it's very easy sometimes to come to a view and a decision. So it's this, and this, and then of course you find it isn't that. Whereas if you're a bit more open to the fact that we're not sure what God is going to do, but He is going to do something. I think that's the point. And you see things happening. It's still very early days for me, and we're still not out of the virus. But and in the end, we can always go back to the idea of the Holy House, that here you have the lesson of humility, the lesson of simplicity, the lesson of utter faithfulness. Yeah. And that is something which draws people, otherwise they wouldn't be coming. And Our Lady stands alongside us, showing us the Father, showing us the heart of Jesus, guiding us on our way, praying for us, encouraging us. And we have her example. That little house, this little, and it is called that, it's not, you might need to build a big church to get everybody in, but the shrine, the place itself was small, humble. The lesson of humility. Now, that is a lesson we can all learn in every season, but perhaps more so today, and to grasp the things that matter rather than things that don't, as we said earlier.
I mean, just as you're speaking there, it's good to be reminded that Walsingham is about the Holy House, and that maybe 5-10 minutes walk from where we're sitting is where the holy house was. And if we were to stop, and if I was to stop and think about the supernatural element entering into the natural, it's quite sort of mind-blowing. However, we live in a very strange time, and Walsingham and throughout the world, circulating at the moment, is a kind of rather dark view of where we're at. Yet it's good to be reminded that the message of Walsingham is not about some sort of apocalyptic.
No, not at all. No, not at all. It's very straightforward, very simple, which is usually a mark of authenticity, and certainly it's an attractive thing. And we've been there before, the time when the shrine was founded, the dedication, the Reformation. The earliest of Paul's letters presuppose that the Christ's second coming may be in the lifetime of some of them. And then, of course, they realise it wasn't. And our Lord himself says, we don't know these things, you don't know these things. And I think it's not helpful to look at it in that way, because that sort of it sort of narrows our focus and our vision of what God might be doing. Because it's easy to say, oh yes, well of course, this is all in the book of Revelation, and this is the end time. I mean, I haven't checked this, but my guess is that people have said that century after century, every time. I mean, during the Black Death, the destruction of life. But this must be it, and it wasn't it.
When things return to normal, whatever that looks like, and you have thousands upon thousands, and there are literally thousands upon thousands of pilgrims coming to Walsingham, what would be the message, what would be the core message that you would want pilgrims to take away from here? And I know each pilgrimage is individual and God speaks in different ways, but I mean, for example, Lourdes, Fatima, they all have their own kind of charism. Yeah. What is it, somebody watching this may not have heard of Walsingham, and what would you say to them is Walsingham's charism?
Well, I think it's humility. I think it's lowliness, not loneliness, obviously. It's simplicity. It's trying to imagine if you like, the quality of living in the house of the Annunciation. So not the house of Jesus, Mary and Joseph, the house of the Annunciation. And when I say imagine, yes, some people are very good at being able to imagine every detail of a place, and that works for them. It doesn't work for everybody. But trying to understand the qualities of what it was that made it such a grace-filled place, and how we can somehow acquire that take some of that for ourselves. So I think to say to maybe in pilgrimages to say, well, think back, what did we rely on before all this happened, before the virus? What were we able to do without? What qualities did we experience? The kindness of strangers, of generosity of spirit of people, going out of their way. In neighbourhoods, putting notes through people's door. Yeah. People living on their own who've never had notes put through their door. I mean, it's a wonderful thing. So, and to try to get people not to go back. So the danger is, of course, once you come out of the plague, if you like, or whatever the catastrophe is, that it's very easy to slide back, and we've learned nothing, and that is the danger. So I don't think I can be more precise than that. But this understanding of what we gain, what we learned about ourselves, and acts of kindness, and how that what that tells us about the love of God, and how God needs, you know, our hands to do his work. The whole centuries of Avila idea, you know, God has no hands but yours. And not to let that disappear, because otherwise we've learned nothing.
If in that holy house, that's the holy house of the fiat.
Yes, yes.
And is there something that we need to relearn at this time?
Yes, I think so. It's this, I mean, so Our Lady isn't a stranger to God's invitations. And I don't think we are either, actually. We may miss them because we're looking one side of the street for the bus to come and it's coming the other side. But they're there. And it's this, the way she was accustomed to, almost to expect to know what God wished, you know, God's invitations, so that when the angel Gabriel comes, yes, of course, she isn't going to understand fully how it's going to happen, but there's an element of acceptance immediately. It's something she's accustomed to doing, and we're not so often. Well, I'm not.
Do you feel, or you know, this is a Marian shrine. Is Our Lady very close to you at this time as priest, as custodian of her shrine?
Yes, I think so. I think yes. I think she has a way. Excuse me. She has a way of drawing you, and here I am. It's God's will. Therefore, it's her will, and I feel myself entitled to rely on her prayer and support.
Wonderful. Well, you certainly have the prayers and the support of EWTN, both globally and also here very much in the village and part of the shrine, and a way of making the shrine better known throughout the world. And we wish you the very best, Monsignor Philip, in your time here. We hope it's full of joy, as well as whatever the Lord has in mind for you.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for coming in this evening and talking to us.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.